super early in the morning, especially those of you who don't have to be here. My name is Carmen Tamas. I apologize for the slightly difficult name. I'm Romanian, that's why you have the Communism model there. I have to tell you that this is kind of a work in progress, because while I was putting together all the slides, I realized that I have a lot of questions and I have absolutely no conclusion. So please forgive me for that. If you have a conclusion or if you have any suggestions, I would really appreciate it. Also, I have to say that I'm an anthropologist, and this is the perspective that I'm going to use in my presentation. So I'm sure most of you are, if you're teaching in Japan, are familiar with the images presented above. Actually, it's not visible here, but the student, this one here, had a very nice drool thread going all the way to his chest. And that's not even visible in the photo, but it was very interesting to look at. And I looked at this, but the problem is we're kind of familiar with this in a Japanese academic environment, and not only. And there is a German anthropologist currently working at the University of Cambridge, Brigitte Steger, and she wrote an entire book on inamuri, sleeping in various places that are not your house or a hotel room. And she says that according to the Japanese culture, this is not a bad thing, because this indicates that you are so tired and so exhausted that you need to catch a few minutes of sleep wherever. So that is why, this is one of her theories, that is why it is acceptable in Japanese society to have students sleep in class. I come from Romania, and I started my education while Romania was still a communist country. It changed when I was 10. So many things changed, but still, I don't know what is happening now. I've left my country 13 years ago, and I'm not involved in the educational process there, so I don't know how things are nowadays. But when I was a student, and that was after the end of the communist regime, it was completely unacceptable to sleep in class. If you were seen doing this once, that meant you would not pass that course, no matter what you did, unless you had a very good excuse, like I had a 40-degree fever or something. Otherwise, it meant your academic career for that year would be over. So, but what is surprising for me and what led to this presentation is the fact that I saw some of my international students from big universities. So I'm going to mention here UCLA, Berkeley, Oxford. So they are big names, and they do the same in class, which raises the questions: why? Is this work-induced fatigue? Is it boredom, in which case I have to question my teaching skills or the class content? Or lack of interest, but then why? Because when I teach international students, I teach electives. If you're not interested, you don't have to come. So my teaching experience, I started working full-time in 2010, and since then I taught English at 2 universities until 2015. About 300 students per year at each university, also at Electrocommunication University and Kansei Gakuin University, School of Science and Technology. So both of them were science-based departments. That would explain the lack of interest students had in English. And I've been teaching international students since 2010, mainly at Osaka University, and I started working full-time with international students last year in October. I also teach part-time at Konan University, Hero School of Management, but that is a completely different school. It's very similar to what Lakeland is doing, NIC is doing. So these are the special students, the students who go to school because they really want to go to school. So they are a minority from my experience. So, talking about education, I think we have a pattern here. When I started doing my research for my master's thesis, I wrote my master's thesis and my PhD thesis in Japanese mythology and classical texts. And my professor said that this is an enterprise for rich people. And so while your parents are doctors, you should do fine because probably they have the money to support you until you die. That's what my mother said. Dear, mythology is not a job, it's a hobby. You're not going to get a job doing this. And it's true, because in my field of work, that was for the privileged. a long time ago. This is Edward Bernard Tyler, and he's one of the biggest names in comparative culture and anthropology. He was the son of a rich merchant, and they had a factory, I think, in England. And how he became an anthropologist, he got tuberculosis. And he was sent to warmer climates that happened to be Mexico, where he discovered new cultures and started writing. So education, at least at this level, but not only this, I happen to have the examples from anthropology because this is my field, but education was for the privileged. The Hungary. This is my country. I don't know if you're familiar with it. Some of you are very young, but if you're in Japan and you say Romania, this is what comes to mind. And I will not show the really obscene gesture that is really bugging me. But this is our former president that was killed on Christmas Day in 1989. And this is Nadia Comaneci, the famous gymnast who got the perfect 10 at the Olympics in Morale. Why do I say the Hungary? Because, well, talking about sports, that's a different thing. We actually, right now in Romania, there is a huge scandal because some of the former gymnasts published a few books saying how badly they were beaten during their training sessions. And that's something everybody knew. That is why all these gymnasts come from very, very poor families. Because, well, we watched that on TV, and even when I was a child, I mean, I've always been a chubby child, so becoming this was out of the question. But I told my parents that I want to be a gymnast, and they said, no way, we're not sending you there. It was something, well, they compared it to Auschwitz. But the hungry, meaning hungry for learning and hungry for adventure and hungry for something else. Learning was the only way to get a chance to go out of the country. You could be very, very good at something and you had the chance to do something, to explore, to do more. So that was during the communist period. Students were motivated to learn. This is nowadays. This is one of my students doing a presentation on dragons, and this is a presentation on Japanese rituals by another student. So we still have passionate students who did more than they had to do, more than they were required to do because they were interested in the field and in the topic. So I was familiar with these three. You were privileged, you could do anthropology, cultural studies, and everything else because, well, your financial situation allowed it, and it was okay for you not to work a lot. Or you came from a communist country and studying was your only way out of the country and into the world, or you were passionate about what you're doing. But nowadays, what I get is like, I don't even know how to call them. I had the first three categories, and it wasn't very difficult for me to divide them. But then, what happens to students nowadays? Even the Japanese students, the Japanese system is not one of the best systems when it comes to the fact that the students work very hard to get into university, and then being in the university has almost no meaning. They know that they will graduate and then they will work into a field that is not related to what they learned in university, and they will have to do a different kind of training all over again. I had students who were physics majors, and when they had to write a composition in English about their future career, one of them said baker. And I said, if you want to be a baker, why do you pay 1,500,000 yen per year to study physics? But in his mind, they were not necessarily connected. He would go to university, get a good degree from a famous university, and then pursue his dream of becoming a baker. So, are they disillusioned? Are they complacent? They think, well, that's the way it's going to be. Are they realistic? Because that connects to the fate of humanities. You know that the humanities are not exactly the most appreciated or sought after field nowadays, and there has been a huge discussion on this, and even I sometimes think. I traveled to Nagano during last weekend, and we went through a few very long tunnels. I was thinking, I study anthropology. How does that help humanity compared to people who can design and build these tunnels? So even as a specialist in humanities, sometimes you have moments of anxiety and moments when you feel you're not doing the right thing. So how can we motivate our students to do more? So my question here is, for the international students, Well, I have noticed an increased lack of interest. When I started in 2010, and believe me, I'm just as passionate because I love anthropology and I love teaching it. But my students in 2010, 2011, 2012 were very interested. I had to stop them from discussing in class because we had to move on. Nowadays, I get from my international students the same blank stares that I get from my Japanese students. This is what I usually get in class. And again, I'm the same person. And from my Japanese students, the only moment of interest is when they ask the question, how can I improve my English? Which at first glance might sound like a legit question. They want to study. They don't. That's the problem. This question does not mean, what can I do? It means, can you give me a magical solution so that my English is better by next week or tomorrow if possible? I have office hours when students can come to my office, get advice about various perspectives. They know I have experience as a foreign student myself, so please come. And one student from my current university came to me and said, I have to go to the University of London starting October. What can I do to improve my English? So I said, okay, well, let's see what your level is and how we can work on that. I checked his level, it was not bad. I sent him a list because he said he had to go, so he only had 15 minutes to talk to me. I sent him a message of things he could do, movies he could watch, and then I told him, well, come and talk to me if you need more. That was the end of it. That was not the answer he was expecting, and it's not the first time. I'm giving you the most recent example because it happened last week. They are waiting for this, which again relates to a lack of motivation and to a lack of real interest. Everything has to be profit-oriented, profit-connected, and it has to have an immediate and real purpose. Talking about statistics, so why education is no longer as important, I have a few numbers here. So for example, in Japan, there were 201 universities and 200,000 students. In 2013, there were 782 universities. In Romania, well, I don't have the numbers, I don't have all the numbers, I don't have the numbers before the end of the communist regime, they were not accessible. But as you can see, in 1990, when there were only state universities, about 47, there were about 200,000 students. But in 2015, we had, so it's a quite short span, and we had 94 universities, almost double that number. So that means education is more accessible. It's still quite cheap. It used to be free in Romania. It's no longer free, but it's still quite cheap. It's accessible. It doesn't represent something important either in Japan or in Romania, and it's quite the same in other countries. Although, from what my British students have told me, it's becoming more and more expensive in England, and the results they get are not as expected. What they told me now is that they have huge loans. So for example, getting into a humanities degree and finishing the 3 university years with a £41,000 loan as not exactly what they would expect. So that's why they would not choose humanities, but something that would bring real and immediate profits. And it's the same, but also for Japan, when we talk about the ideal, so the dream and the reality, this is in the 1960s, where they could hope for a lot of things. The standards were, well, having a refrigerator in the car and being able to go to the university. But in 2016, according to the Ministry of Labor, there were over 1.5 million people on welfare. And from my studies in contemporary Japanese society, there were a lot more people who actually need welfare, but according to the still traditional mentality, it's shameful to apply. So they would rather be poor than apply for welfare. So actually the number of people living under the poverty limit is much greater. So that might be an indicator of why the interest has decreased. Why study humanities if you have to be poor, or if you have to get such a huge loan in order to get a degree, I don't know, in anthropology. So I'm going to end this here, again, with my first question, why study anthropology and how to motivate our students. This is Ireland's national treasure, the Book of Kells, was created in the 9th century. And this is the longest suspension bridge in the world. Actually, this part is the longest in the world for a suspension bridge, as the bridge is not the longest in the world. It's the Akashi Bridge in Japan. So, a question for you, which do you think is more important? Thank you very much.